Okay. Hello, Wuj. Are you ready? Woo! I'm not. Okay. So my name is Oskar Dudycz. On a daily basis, I'm trying to help people in various different ways as a consultant, as a humble team member, as an open source creator to build systems that are close to the business. So mostly using event-driven architecture. And I will tell you the story of a project. And as much absurd this story may seem, none of those cases were made up. They really happened. Either I did all of those mistakes or some of those mistakes, and those that I didn't, my clients or my friends did. So this will be the story of Raxo. And you're meeting Raxo definitely not in the best time of his life. You can see that in his Polish smile. And if we rewind a few months back, then we can see that Raxo here is having the time of his life, because the Jane, his manager, came to him and told that, hey Raxo, we need to rebuild our legacy system. And of course, Raxo, when he heard that, it was like, this is my moment, finally. I know that each of you have had that moment, right? At least I did. So that was a finally chance to get rid of all this nasty legacy code, of all those nasty features that we don't want to work, and to replace that with the shiny new architecture. And this is Nomad. And Nomad is yet another example of the classical Polish smile. And that's another hero of our story. And not surprisingly, Nomad sits between the time of Nomad's life and the worst day of his life. That's not an accident. So Nomad is the oracle type of guy. Have you met that type of guy? It's the type of guy that always know better, and of course he loves oracle. He's the legacy lover, oracle lover. And he's also why don't you just type of guy. Why don't you just add another insert? Why don't you just add another if statement? You know that type of person. Maybe you are that type of person. I was at least a few times. So let's have a look on the current design. And they all were building the hospitality system. Talking in a plain language, it's a system that was built to manage the hotel, the whole life cycle of the guests, so all the stuff that can happen, check-in, check-out, invoicing, yada yada. And this is the current design. And really, this is the current design of the most popular software in that space. It's called Opera, and it was indeed bought by the Oracle. And it's indeed running on premise. So if you need to change something, you hire the Oracle consultant that is coming to your hotel, going to your hidden on-premise server and changing some stored procedures in the Oracle system. But as I said, the business decided that for some reason we really need to go modern. And Nomad vision of going modern was, why don't we just lift and shift? Oof, I made it. The first time I was giving this talk, I made a small accident, and instead of lift and shift, I told lift and... I'm proud of myself. So lift and shift, although it would work even better in that case. So lift and shift is that we are taking our current architecture and just using some sort of modern or modern-ish way to handle stuff. So Nomad's vision of going modern was, why don't we just take this on-premise system, put it into the VMs, for instance, in Amazon EC2, could be Azure, whatever is your preferred cloud system. Nomad's was Amazon, because it was amazing. And he agreed that maybe indeed those Oracle licensing costs are a bit too high, and maybe if we want to make it a bit more cost effective, then fine, let's use this Postgres thing. And Raxovision was a bit different, not such a surprise. So of course, Nomad's vision was that, Raxovision was, this is the moment where we can finally introduce the domain-driven design, where we can talk with our domain experts, when we can organize those sessions where we will be placing all those sticky notes and trying to understand each other. He also wanted to use the event-driven architecture. Of course, Kafka introduced microservices, or as people in DDD space, they are calling bounded context, etc., right? And he, of course, wanted to use Kubernetes and be cloud native, because why not? We have to use Kubernetes these days. There is no other option, even if we just want, what we need is the cron. But yeah, fine. So as you see, those visions were kind of clashing each other, right? Hard to beat. So let's find what was the compromise. And the compromise to use DDD, but not this DDD that unfortunately the Raxo wanted. It was a database-driven design, or deployment-driven design, or in Polish, dawaj deploy, yeah? That was this type of design. And of course, Nomad has his point of view, and he has his own thoughts like, dude, we have all the knowledge. We don't need to reinvent. We don't need to do these weird meetings and, talk with the people. We have this knowledge inside, in the database. Why don't we just reuse it? And of course, Nomad felt like, yeah, fine, we need to find some compromise, then maybe let's change a bit this lift and shift and introduce some new pieces. Let's introduce Kafka, because Nomad read that if you add Kafka, then you will be having everything solved, EDA and all that stuff. So let's put Kafka as a heart and a centerpiece of our design. And to make that easier, because Nomad is that type of guy that he don't want to reinvent the wheel, so he said like, fine, let's use change detection capture, because it will allow to automatically take every change that we did and magically transform it into event and make it an integration point for all of our services. That's how EDA works, right? At least if you find and read articles on the internet. So let's have a look what's actually the change detection capture. The change detection capture plugs into the changes that are happening into the database, and the implementation can be really in many different ways. We will discuss one. It can be pooling, we can be pooling those data, we can be push-based, but nevertheless, what's the implementation? Those changes can be propagated, like each insert statement, each update statement, each delete statement, be propagated and changed into the message. And that can happen automatically. If we are using Kafka, then we can also plug this magical component called Kafka Connect, where we have those connectors, and then magically it will land into the Kafka. And then on the other side, we can have a sync connectors, which will propagate all those messages to the consumers. So anyone knows what's that? Cool. I'm really, really glad that you can read. That's always a positive sign. But what actually the write-ahead log? Anyone? I know that yesterday was after party. It's hard today. The head is heavy. I know. Yeah, so the funny thing is that databases actually internally works close to how Kafka does, because internally we have this so-called log, write-ahead log, or I think many of you are coming from the .NET space, then in MS SQL it's called transaction log. So each of the operation that we are doing, if we are starting our transaction, so those begin statements, and all the inserts, updates, deletes are actually messages that are stored into this append-only log. And From the database perspective, our tables, indexes, etc., are just read models, because when we are committing our changes, then they are actually updating the tables and putting the data. And why is it important? Because if, for instance, we want to use Postgres as Nomad and Raxo wanted to use, then you can get like push notifications through the logical replication. Postgres can tell us not only in this weird binary format, but also with the logical statement what happened, and we can propagate those changes. And that's precisely what actually Nomad wanted to do, because it's like plug and play, wash and go. And 2 sprints later, magically, Nomad say like, boom, I got it. I just plugged, I deployed my reservation module, I deployed the Kafka cluster, I also created the RDS with Postgres, also with Oracle, just for fun, because I like Oracle, and I plugged the CDC, and it magically worked. And of course, Raxo was a bit suspicious. That was a bit too fast. However, business was really happy about it, because business loves when someone is saying, let's reuse what we have. And that's precisely what was the Nomad narrative. And Raxo was surprised by the delivery speed, as most of us would be. And Raxo checked what he actually got. And it appeared that he expected to get the business meaningful events like reservation confirmed, reservation cancelled, but actually or maybe room type change, guest added, guest removed, etc. Stay duration change, additional services requested, but actually instead of tentative reservation placed, he got reservation created. Instead of room type change, he got reservation updated. Instead of reservation confirmed, he got reservation updated. Instead of additional services requested, reservation updated. And this was a surprise, because instead of reservation cancelled, he got reservation deleted. And actually what he got was the crowdsourcing. And crowdsourcing is that when we are taking our direct technical state changes and putting that into the messages, then of course we can do that. Technically, even 2 sprints to plug that, it's doable. But without the business context, we are getting information that it's hard to integrate. So Raxo wanted to discuss that with Nomad, and Nomad said like, dude, you have all the information, just do the comparison. What are you asking me to change again? And Raxo got back to the management, and the management said that they're the same picture. Nah, just joking. Because the fun fact is that if we go back to management and to our business people, and they will see those reservations created, updated, deleted, then they will say, no, this is not how our business works. What's that actually? What does it mean, reservation updated? So 1 point for Raxo. It's the first battle that he won. The management asked Nomad, hey dude, just fix that. That's not doable. This is not the reason why we are making this big revamp. And then, so again, the reason why we are just getting those cradish events is that if we technically are plugging into the change detection capture, the only thing that we can get is the information about the SQL statements. So, and also for the specific table. So if we have more than one table, and usually we have this whole schema and whole star of events, then we are getting, for each of the table, we will get an additional inserts, updates, delete messages. And that's not business meaningful, because we don't know how to correlate that. I mean, no one is laughing at the circus that tried to correlate and find out what was the reason of that issue if you got such messages. So the potential solution is, besides updating our data at our regular state, also publishing and storing in another table, in so-called outbox table, the business meaningful events. So here, instead of updating, we don't need to resign from anything that we have. We can do an updates to our table as we were doing, but also keep the business context, because most of the time, if we are changing, if we are publishing one event, that can mean that data in multiple tables was changed. So we can wrap it into the transaction, and then we are sure that either all the state was changed and all the messages were published, or no change was propagated. And after that, what we can do is that we can, after we store that, then we can have the background process or push-based notifications that will propagate and push those messages forward. And thanks to that, we are getting the at least once delivery guarantee, because we are sure that eventually this message will be propagated. And the examples schema of this table is super simple. We need to store some payload potentially in JSON and store some additional metadata. And not surprisingly, those tooling that I mentioned, so like Kafka Connect, etc., they can also provide you this out of the box, or if you are using some solutions like Service Bus, Mass Transit, or Wolverine, those tooling can give you that nomen out of the box. And getting back to Nomad, as he was pushed by the management to deliver a bit more meaningful events, then one sprint later, he was faster by one sprint this time, he delivered another set of changes. And again, Raxo was suspicious. And the good thing is that he didn't get anymore the CRUD sourcing, but the bad part is that he got instead the property sourcing. And what's property sourcing actually? Because instead of those reservation updated, deleted, and created, he got reservation status updated, reservation guest number set, guest name changed, guest phone number changed, guest email updated. So he was flooded by a granular singular events. And of course, some of those events can be business meaningful. Like for instance, if we are changing room type, then probably that will affect the price of our room, so our reservation. Reservation days updated can also mean that we change the length of our state, which again can trigger some business flow. But most of those information are just not meaningful. You don't know. If you get this message, then you don't know what actually has happened business-wise. And when Raxo got back to Nomad, the Nomad said, dude, I really tried. I was talking with business, but they told me that I have to do it because what I got from business was that UI. And this is the screen, if you don't recall, this is Jira. And it's not the greatest UI. And quite often, I'm sure that you also get this requirement that we need to change each field and be enabled to changing each field. And changing each field can sometimes be just a state change, but can also be a tip of the iceberg and trigger a regular business workflow. And just doing your design in general, the architecture design based on UI and not even UX, is a trap, because you might end up with all those granular events that you don't understand anything about it. And the potential solution is, not surprisingly, got back to the drawing board, try to rethink what actually happens when you change this specific field. And for instance, if you got back, then you might realize that, okay, maybe some sort of events are representing a stage change. In this case, guest personal data refined. So maybe instead of having all those a lot of small events, maybe we can group them and put them together. And then instead of having each class of each event, like guest last name changed, guest first name changed, etc., or even worse, containing the previous value and the next value, maybe we could add the option property. And option means that we are marking whether this field was changed or not, And if we use this structure and group that into guest personal data refined, then we can publish this event, this single event that will contain information exactly about what has changed. And that's a bit more business meaningful, and it's much easier to reason when you see that event. And then the reality kicks in, and Raxo heard that, yeah, of course, I agree again with you, but we don't have much time. You need to work what you have. And so Raxo did. And let's take a break from the events, and I will ask you, have you seen such headlines? 1/5 of this occupation has a serious drinking problem. 11 things you should never put in your freezer. 5 surprising things that will boost the value of your home. Or one of my favorite, Gear adds 4,000 washing up sponges. Or the classic, I cannot sleep because I'm keeping my cupboard. And I found out that there is a 30 years later that he's no longer keeping this cupboard because unfortunately it broke down, but he still can't sleep. So all of those things are clickbaits. And when why am I telling you about clickbaits? This is the definition from the Wikipedia. Don't worry, I will shorten a bit that, and let me read it. Clickbait is a link that is designed to attract attention and to entice users to follow that link and read view. A teaser, providing just enough information to make readers curious, but not enough to satisfy their curiosity. Does the bell ring? Does it sound familiar? So let's have a look on the reservation status updated. I saw that type of events numerous times. The only thing that they get is like reservation ID plus maybe, I don't know, date or whatever. And if you get this type of event, like from the financial module perspective, then what you need to do, then you always need to ask the reservation module to provide more data because you don't know what exactly has happened. So this is a classical example of the clickbait event, because from the financial module, you are only interested about confirmed reservation. You don't care about anything that happened before. So I rephrased a bit this clickbait news into clickbait event, and let me read it again. Clickbait event contains a basic set of information, forcing consumers to follow that link and read view from the producer. A teaser, providing just enough information to trigger consumer, but not enough to satisfy the business process needs. So precisely, if you are publishing that type of event, then that's a classical example of the clickbait event. So let me show you that again. So we are, there is a comment confirm reservation. Reservation module publishes that reservation status updated, and that's a happy path in theory, because then the financial module can query the reservation module and get the data. But it also can mean that someone just changed status from, like, I don't know, tentative to not so tentative or whatever, and we might be querying this information again and again. And another example, imagine that you had a car crash. Great thing to have. Not. So, you want to call your insurer, but it appears that they are working from 9 to 5. So you want to do it, and you are setting up your alarm just to not forget to call immediately at 9 a.m. because you know that you will be staying along in the line. So 1 minute before 9, you are calling, and then you are asked to hold the line. And you are hearing this beautiful melody, and then again you are calling, and again, and again, and again. And this is precisely what happens if you have those clickbait events. So Raxo got back to Nomad and also tried to follow this and say like, hey, Nomad. And Nomad, of course, say like, you just got the notification, just query, I will expose you the endpoint, you will have everything you need. But the consequences are, this is again a happy path. So you are publishing the event, then you are triggering some flow in the financial module, They are querying the data, getting the latest data, and then maybe realizing that, yeah, that's not yet the state that I want to be. Then we are getting another reservation status updated. Again, our flow is triggered. We are again getting the data. And that's still not that bad, because everything is following the flow. But we might have race conditions, and it might appear that we have some delay in processing those events. And if we are querying, then we are getting newer state that we expected. Not always an issue, but it's always an issue when we are querying the data and the data was already deleted. And how do we know whether it was deleted or it never existed, and we should be querying continuously again and doing the retries? Or another moment where we have a delay, but somewhere in between, and we actually don't know what's the current state. So in Kafka, even though it said that, yeah, you have these topics, you have partitioning, but you also can have the race conditions, because you are getting only the guarantee of, or the order of the of appearance, let's say, only on the topic level, or actually on the partition level. And that's quite critical, because topic is the logical split and partition is the physical split. If you are not using Kafka, then in Rabbit it's similar, but for the queues, so within the queue, if you have single listener, then that's the only way that you can get this guarantee of the ordering. And the dangerous thing that you might have besides the race conditions is the issues with the event ordering. So how you are observing those changes. You already saw some of that. And this is the department store. And I just show some of those queues. And of course, the only rule, if we look on that about the ordering, is that someone that is standing in front of us will be served earlier than we, and the other rule is that our queue will go the slowest. But if you ask someone like, which person will be served first, this lady, this gentleman, or this one, you never know, because between the queues you don't have any ordering guarantees. You might just guess. And other consequences besides the race condition event ordering, it's like exponential growth of calls, because the service might not be available, or you might have some delay processing, and then you will be calling and retrying again. And I saw the cases where those retries were stopping the service to wake up, because they were constantly banging the service and killing it again as fast as it managed to restore. So it's like the exponential growth of calls, or in other words, release the Kraken. This is precisely how it looks. So again, we are getting the chattiness of the communication. So that's precisely what Raxo got. And if you are getting all those small granular events, those property sourcing, then that's precisely the consequences that you will get in your system. So how to deal with click bytes? And of course, we should be treating our events as an API. For some reason, if we are somehow used to discuss between front-end and back-end team the API, but between the different services and different modules, those asynchronous communication, now that's not an API. Those are just events, right? Actually not. So we should be treating our events as API. We should be considering subscribers' needs, because the thing, everyone is saying that event-driven architecture brings the loosely coupled architecture, but that's not correct. It's only loosely coupled for the producer, because consumer needs to adapt, and you already saw that. So it's only loosely coupled for the producer. And it's just an imagination that we can live and design our API without considering subscribers or consumer needs. And we also need to understand message semantics. And you might be like, what? Message semantics? Is like event-driven architecture, isn't that all about events? If you read on the internet, then you might get that also information. But actually, do you remember that guy? Anyone knows that? Yeah, that's a Gregor Hoppe. And that's a really guy that, in my opinion, you should follow. And especially that he wrote this thick book. I had it on my office. It's almost, I think, 700 pages. I haven't read that from from front to the back, but actually this book contains the enterprise integration pattern, and it's like a cookbook of how you can integrate your systems, and it's still up to date. Of course, the visualizations are kind of like a 20th century, not 21st century, but you can also read that on Gregor Hoppe page. And Gregor Hoppe, besides those integration pattern, I will show you one later more, he also made the distinctions about the message semantics and message types. So it's not only that we have events, we also have at least two other, the most important types, command and document. Someone called that states. Gregor Hoppe called that document. And document represents state. So we can visualize also state transition as just message passing. If you have a look on the change detection capture and this crowdsourcing, then that's precisely what we are doing. Those are not events. Those are just new states, new version of our document, table, whatever we call it. And then we can use it to synchronize that. Events are immutable facts. It's represent past. What has been seen cannot be unseen as much as we want it, sometimes too. And they are immutable, so we can just ignore them, but we cannot change the past, at least not easily. And commands represent intention, not something that has happened, that what we intend to happen. So command can be rejected, and that's an important distinction between event and command. Command can be rejected because you need to validate, and if you are sending command, then the receiver is like a source of truth for this decision making. And the typical flow looks like that we have command, then we have the business rule, and the business rule takes the state or document and then validates the business rules that we need to check, so in other words, invariants, to run our business logic. And as a result, we might reject this intention to do something, but we might also publish and store the event. So again, this blue box is a command, it's an intention, the green one is the state, and the orange one is fact. And here we have rules, so it's like a cross. And a question for you, just to wake up you a bit. What happens if we connect the state with event? What do we get as a result? Wakey, wakey. It's a crowdsourcing. So again, it's really essential to understand those semantics. And yeah, this is how that works in general. So as a result, logically, we are getting event in event-driven architecture, which can change the state, which can trigger another operation, and business flow can trigger commands, and so on and so forth. Alberto Brandolini, the creator of event storming, said that this is the picture that explains everything. I think that it's a bit exaggerated, but it shows this flow. So we are sending command, running the business logic, getting the event, which can trigger either a business flow or update the read model, and this can go and round in circles. So what I'm trying to say is EDA is not about this tooling, not about CDC, not about Kafka, not about Reddit. EDA is the architecture that uses events to integrate our components. So event-driven architecture is not about tooling, about eventual consistency. It's about the logical split, how we are composing, and that events are driving the integration between parts of our system. And the big benefit of event-driven architecture is the composition, because we are getting those components that are integrated in a specific contracts that we define. And it's also about the reliability. Some are saying that eventual consistency is not reliable. But nowadays, that's the best reliability that we can get because we have the microtransaction. I think that I invented this term. Yeah, another buzzword. So, but essentially what our microtransaction is that if we have this messages and message passing like events, commands, etc., then we can in our component, we can run our business logic because we have clear understanding what is the source of truth, store this state, which is not partial. It's actually from the component perspective, it's just the state, and then trigger another operation, which again will store and keep the state. So we don't have a single point of failure. And again, Kafka is a tool for message passing. Some might say that Kafka is for event streaming. For me, it's a potato discussion. Event streaming comes from the fact that those messages are expected to be flowing continuously. So like it's more like a philosophical for me than the real thing. So event streaming is about putting those events in motion and those events to integrate. And that's a big distinction between event streaming and event sourcing, because event sourcing is about storing those business events as a result of business operation and making another decision. So event sourcing stands here because event stores are databases, but if you are using a regular approach or regular databases, then in the same way, using outbox pattern, you can also publish your messages and use that to integrate that. And questions, are events async or sync? So asynchronous or synchronous? Yeah, I know. Just shoot me. Async or sync? Okay, I see that I have an architect on our room. Okay, so where are commands sync or async? Because in the internet quite often it's say like, nah, events are always async and commands are always sync. Bravo, bravo. So if we look on this thick book, then we can find like request reply pattern, one of those 75, I think, patterns that he described there. And here it shows how we can model the regular synchronous flow in an asynchronous way. So we can send requests, which will be put into some queue. Then another service will receive this message. This one will be waiting for the message to appear on another queue. And if you are using RabbitMQ, then that's, I think, the most popular semantics of using queue per message. And this shows just that if you really want to, then you can have those queuing services, but your API can look like a synchronous API. So are commands synchronizing? As Gutek said, it depends. It can be this way or another way, but it's not the decision that you do when you are discussing your logical split, but this is the decision that you should make when you are going a bit deeper. So from my perspective, EDA is about logical split, and once we design this logical idea, then we need to validate that with all those integration patterns and decide precisely based on our specific use case which integration pattern, which messaging pattern we should use. And Kafka is a tool, Rabbit is a tool, is enabler for doing that. And why does that even matter? So let's get back to our favorite duo. So Raxo and Nomad. And the good part is that Raxo managed to persuade Nomad. See, Nomad is not that entirely bad guy. He managed to persuade him to add a bit more information to make it a bit more meaningful. So for instance, add room type, confirmed add, etc. And that worked for some time. Great. Like 2 or 3 sprints. It worked for 2 or 3 sprints. But after that, Raxo got back to Nomad and say like, hey, I appreciate what you did. But I need a bit more information, so like guest stay information and the length of the stay. Could you add that information? And this time Nomad used the arguments that Raxo had before for the Raxo. Like, dude, you asked me to have the granular, precise business information. That's what I did. I make it a focus on the business. They are as small as possible. So you also have those and other events. What's wrong with you? Just use those events. And that's what Raxo did. So he realized that there are more events that he should be listening and connect those to connect the business workflows. And again, that worked for some time. But then Raxo got back to Nomad and said, you know, I subscribed to all those events that you told me, and that worked for some time. But now our business is saying that we are getting some small discrepancies, like thousands of euros. And do you know why is it happening? I tried to investigate, but I have no idea. And Nomad start typing, checking the code, start checking logs. And then it was like, yeah, what a moron, what a moron. He found the issue and really realized that between that time, they added a new types of events, and that for some reason, either Raxo didn't know about or maybe ignored those events. And he said like, dude, you just need to subscribe to those 2 more events, and then you will have everything settled. And with the current design, as you see, each module has its own topic or a queue or whatever we call it. And if we are publishing events, then both reservation module is subscribing to that event to trigger their own internal workflows, and also the financial module is doing the same. And if we have such a singular topic or singular queue, then this is the happy path. But if you are adding another event, for instance, reservation initiated, because initially you just had the immediately confirmed reservation, but now it's a bit more complex, then this single change is not only changing the reservation module, but immediately it's also triggering change in the financial module. And that change can be even 2 workflows, so even more than in your original system. And the same for other cases. Each time you are adding new event and asking the other team, then you are doing the release train and you increase coupling. So something that you want to avoid in theory in using event-driven architecture. So this is what actually the reservation, the financial team needed. So information that reservation was confirmed, and all that information like the number of people, the room type, etc. They don't need all this granular information. They don't care about it. If they just got everything that they needed here, then it would be fine. So what to do? Because it said that our events should be as small as possible, and also that we should be keeping our architecture loosely coupled. So when Nomad came to Raxo code came to Nomad, then Nomad could say like, why do you need that? Could you explain that to me? What's your business workflow? What's your use case? And we could ask those the questions like, how many other modules will have the similar need? How much data will you need to expose? Are those information personally identifiable? And so on and so forth. So asking those important questions to understand the business workflow and the data that we need to integrate. And one potential solution is to embrace that we not only have those events, which are the events. You already know that we also have commands and we also have documents, but we should also be doing split for the internal and external events. So in the same way as we are doing with any other API. So we could keep our internal topic or internal queue with all those granular events because we understand our business workflow. But for other module, we could have a bit, let's say, bigger events that contain the business information. And do not mistake those events with snapshots, because they are not snapshot. I'm calling that summary event. And one can say that those are the same picture. This is the same picture. Those are the same events. And actually the same, but from the different perspective. Because those internal events are those that you can understand inside your module. So your internal business logic or private, and the other events is like from the perspective of the whole system. So in the DDD space, they are calling that domain events and integration events. In my opinion, that's a really terrible name because they are all domain events. They are just from a different perspective. Private, public, I think it's also a good name. Nick Tune suggests that. So enriching means that we are taking these granular events, adding some additional data, and then we are getting the result. So this is an example. So here we have those basic data, and there we have those data that can be needed for other external module. And this enrichment can be like that once we are getting internal event, then first we are loading additional data, then we are preparing the external event and publishing this external event to some other topic, some other dedicated channel, dedicated for other modules. And is it enough? So let's look on Raxo face. So we are going back to this initial slide. And this is the moment where Raxo realized that he's doomed, like C3PO. And because he realized that he created distributed monolith. And hell is filled with the good intention, and that's what they got. Because distributed monolith is like a room filled with people shouting at each other. So they are not exchanging, they are not talking to each other, just shouting and sending, informing others. And in our systems, to not end up with the distributed monolith, we should model our communication in a way how our conversations are built. So again, we should embrace that we not only have events, but also comments. Sometimes it's good to be direct. It's not bad. Of course, we should favor the asynchronous communication, the event-based communication, not to end up with the micromanagement version of the communication, but still. Have you heard that phrase? The trash bin is full. The dishwasher finished cleaning. And those are exactly passive-aggressive events. And passive-aggressive events, like instead of asking to reserve room or create financial account, we are sending order was confirmed. Do what you want with that. I don't care. And that's how we are getting to this nice guy, nice chap. I'm not sure if he's still living. And it's Mel Conway. And in 1967, he created a famous Conway law. So the way how we are structuring communication in our organization will be directly reflected in our organization structures. Sorry, the communication just copies the organizational structure. It's just like a gravity law. You cannot fight with that. This is just how it is. And this is exactly what they got, because you saw how the communication and how the organization structure worked in that project. And they got like distributed monolith. They broke the modules, not because that was the need and that was the result of the proper design process, but because Nomad didn't want to communicate with Raxo, so he decided that I will build reservation and I will let Nomad do the other stuff, etc. And if we have those events and all the other modules are just listening for that events, then we are ending precisely with this shouting room filled with people that are just, I wasn't interrupting you, right? And passive-aggressive events are really dangerous, as maybe funny or silly it seems. It's one of the worst type of mistakes that you can do, because it's really hard to rewind, and it's really hard to change after on. So what did Raxo do, and what could do? So they could, for instance, discuss with a tool like context map what are actually relationship, not only between the modules, but also between teams. And context maps provide you like a tool, like a framework to define what is the dependency not only between modules, but also between teams. So maybe it's shared kernel. So like between reservation and guest stays, maybe they contain a shared library, a shared table, or whatever. Maybe it's partnership, because we as a team are responsible for 2 other modules, and it's much easier to discuss inside the single team and make decision. So for instance, reservation and guest stays could be done by the same team. Or maybe we have the customer supplier and upstream, downstream. So we have reservation and finances, and maybe upstream means that who's more important. It doesn't sound good, but if we embrace that not all are equal, and maybe some teams are equal, and it's not only about the business value, but also sometimes organizational value, maybe because someone is drinking beer with the manager, that's also a reason. So if we embrace that, then we can also easier model the communication. And if we reflect, and if we take that like the inverse Conway maneuver, so if we reflect our organization structure in our communication structure, then maybe that will be easier. So yeah, there are also other patterns that you could use. So then maybe if we sit down and talk with each other and define the responsibilities between our modules and our team and make that clear and explicit, then maybe we wouldn't end up with such a nasty and bad situation like we have. So to sum up, if we are doing event-driven architecture, then we should start with what? We need to understand what we are building. We should start with the modeling. If you don't like event storming, you can use C4, whatever works for you. What works for you to make your understanding about the business. We should be discussing the boundaries, but also between teams, not only between our modules. Because if not, then we can end up instead of data mesh, which is the popular buzzword, but data mess. Then, having that, we can discuss how to do it. So this is the moment where those processes are coming into the event-driven architecture, understanding semantics, discussing the integration patterns, etc., discussing the APIs. And after that, we can finally talk about with. So with what tooling that we want to implement, and how, with what tooling those integration patterns that we selected we want to do. So the message that I want to send to you, don't take around the issue, and especially don't Kafka around the issue. And that's all for me. Thank you.